Personal finance presentation. Finance, economics, and accounting. Prepare to get financially fit by practicing personal finance. As with corporate finance or business finance, when we think about personal finance, we have to consider different areas that have some overlap within them. Those include economics, accounting, and finance. Note that as a business grows, they're typically going to increase in specialization, meaning that as you work for larger and larger businesses, you'll typically be doing less and less or more narrow of a task, although that task will be more complex, the business then taking advantage of specialization. If you look at a small business, the extreme being a sole proprietorship, then the individuals, or if you were to work in one, you're probably going to be doing a much more wide range of things going across different areas, although those areas are going to be less complex because there's less transactions taking place. Whereas if you work for a large company, you're going to be very specialized, but that specialized area is going to have a lot of need given just the size of the corporation. When you think about the personal finances, it's a similar scenario. The goal of personal finances is different than the business because note, as we saw in a prior presentation, the business goal in and of itself has already been separated from the personal to be business related. From a finance perspective or an accounting perspective, revenue generation is the goal. When you look at the personal side of things, your goal is going to be more broad, and that's going to be one of the major differences between personal and business. But as you think about, finances and accounting and whatnot, that in those areas, you're going to be similar to a small business in that you gotta be less specialized, you gotta be more broad, and think about these different kind of areas and how they're going to be impacting your personal financial strategy. So we have economics, accounting, and finance. Also note from just a field type of strategy from an educational standpoint, the same thing kind of happens as with a corporation. As it gets larger, that means there's going to be more specialization. So when something gets to large enough to a point where it can be specialized in and of itself, it kind of breaks off into its own world. And we think of that own world as having kind of linear lines between the two of them. Like economics is completely different from accounting, completely different from finance. No, they kind of grow out of the same type of thing, and there's going to be basically overlap between them. But in essence, when we're thinking about the economics, usually we're taking a step back and looking at the environment that we're going to be working in. There's also going to be macroeconomics and microeconomics, but in essence, we're saying taking a step back, what's the kind of market that we're going to be working in? When we're looking at investments, what's going on in the investment world in general, what's going on with things like the money supply. You're going to be using terms on the macro side like GDP and gross domestic product and so on. When you go into the accounting side of things, you're zeroing in on your particular books to look at your particular performance. Accounting provides historical financial data using reports, balance sheet, and the income statement being the major two reports you're looking at. So when you're looking at the accounting, you're thinking about, I'm actually recording the data. I'm trying to record the data in such a way that I can look back on what has been done, get an accurate perspective of where I am now, so that I can then use that data to make projections into the future. Now, again, if you think about accounting, there's terms like managerial accounting, which has a whole lot of overlap with things like finance as well. But in essence, when you're thinking about accounting, especially from just simply the bookkeeping standpoint of things, you're trying to record things as you go in an accurate way. So when you look back on it, you can measure both your performance as well as where you stand at this point in time. That then helps you to get the groundwork as to what you can project into the future. And then when we think about finance, that's going to be our future-oriented thing. Again, if you think about accounting or something like that, or economics, you're going to see terms as well that are going to be business-related, where you could say, well, this is managerial accounting. It's future-oriented. We're going to do some of the same kind of concepts. There will be overlap. But in essence, when you're thinking about finance, you're thinking future-oriented. You're doing things like taking the financial data that you have gotten from your bookkeeping and taking the environment that you're in from a more broader economic standpoint and saying, okay, now what's going to be my strategy? This is kind of more of your strategy step looking into the future, which would include budgeting and kind of long-term strategy. So that's going to be future-oriented, taking both economics and accounting data to make decisions. So note, that's going to be that's a really broad kind of look at this. There's a lot of overlap between accounting, between finance, and between economics, but that's one way you can kind of visualize of how you want to put things together. Economics, your broader standpoint, what's going to be my, investing area, what's the market that I'm working in looking like, what's going to be the, the macro economy and the investment environment. And then when you're looking at the accounting, we're thinking in this terms more like simply the bookkeeping, keeping the books, making the financial data, making reports. Those reports, when you're looking at accounting from this perspective, usually presenting or representing the past, what has been happening so far. When you think about doing budgets or something like that, then those are kind of accounting and they're future oriented. So that kind of falls in the mid-range between finance and accounting, because you're going to take your budget, you're going to project out into the future and try to manage your spending and that kind of thing. So there's going to be obviously accounting concepts and strategies that will be in place as you do that. But then you've got the finance, which is usually going to be the future-oriented strategies. And normally when we think about financing, the reason I say budgeting is kind of in the middle is because oftentimes we don't really think about it, the budget maybe as financing. Financing often we're thinking about the longer-term goals, which from accounting terms you might think as like managerial accounting, the things that the decisions that are going to be more longer focused decisions where you got to take into consideration like time value of money and plans out into the future are often things when we got the finance coming into play. And obviously when you get the finance coming into play, you're thinking about investments and those types of longer term strategies.